Video games are a form of art. They tell a story like a book. They feature great artwork in the form of visuals. They convey meaning through well-placed music. Today, we will be discussing how this is achieved by Santa Monica Studios' hit 2022 game, God of War Ragnarok. The game's fantastic plot and gameplay give the player an unparalleled experience in the story of Kratos, the God of War, and his attempts to break away from his predestined path. The way the game is presented through non-linear open-world areas to achieve an expected outcome is brilliant. Enjoy analyzing this game as much as I did. God of War Ragnarok completely shifts the narrative from Kratos being prepared to live out his days peacefully to a returning warlord prepared to continue the decimation of pantheons and the means of protecting what he holds near to himself. This renewal of Kratos' old ways hurls him down a path that he must navigate in order to see out their days as father and son. Nonetheless, we are not here to review the story of the game that won Best Narrative for 2022. Rather, we look to take a deeper dive into the building of the fabled story of the Ghost of Sparta through the mechanics and environments presented to us by Santa Monica Studios, as well as exploring wrinkles and symbolism imbued in the tale. Ragnarok begins in the snowy realm of Midgard, where Kratos recalls the events of the 2018 God of War game. Kratos already seems more mellowed out in this scene, and the ambient sounds of the cold winter breeze and dim visuals of a fleeting fire set the new game to be less of a battle with other gods and more of a calming of a chaos-filled life. First word the God of War even says to Atreus in the game is home. Perhaps in Kratos' mind he has passed the days of slaying deities, but the ensuing scene proves that he's still on a path, though you may not realize it. Upon exiting the cave, we see Atreus holding what we later learn to be a stone with a giant's soul stored inside, foreshadowing the prophecy that the giants had foretold, and which Atreus will hold in high regard as Kratos simply prepares the slave for departure. The theme of fate is directly and indirectly displayed throughout Ragnarok, with the previously mentioned scene being one of the less clear approaches of pointing to the theme of the game. Obviously, later on the player discovers the prophecy that the giants have laid out for Atreus to find. Over and over throughout the game, Kratos finds himself falling in line with his destiny, although he claims frequently that he will not let his outcome dictate his actions, once more signifying he feels irrelevant to the prophecy. This is pretty interesting, considering that the giants have foretold that Kratos will meet his end following the events that take place during Ragnarok. This narrative of fate and its existence and relevance drives the events that we see unfold throughout the game. Each good theme has its opposing side in a well-written story, and while at first glance it may appear that Ragnarok's counter-theme comes from Kratos' indifference to the prophecy, we may need to look deeper into the way the game is presented to us to see the true argument that is made against the existence of fate, and how this actually reinforces the original theme that we can more clearly observe. We should discuss the role that fate plays in the story of God of War Ragnarok. At the center of fate lies control, which brings up the age-old question of whether lives are predetermined or if free will is dominant over the former. I believe the journey of Kratos through the Nine Realms serves to further the theme that free will does not actually exist, and that predetermination is what drives existence. This is most clearly portrayed not through the characters' dialogue, events of the story, or even the eventual climax of the game. Instead, I think that the creators of God of War Ragnarok employ a more subtle way to directly appeal to the player, through the environments and actions they decide to explore and the eventual outcome of said decisions. If you've played through Ragnarok, maybe you've noticed this. If not, let me explain. The first important detail you will need to know is that the game flows completely without pauses and the cutscenes don't load, giving the experience of a tale that is continually pushing forward, directly contradicting the stance that Kratos takes during the opening scene of settling down with Atreus. This presentation of the game is uncommon, and its inclusion should serve to set the pace as the game developers intended, which is to constantly move towards conclusion regardless of the actions that are taken throughout the story. This is a nice detail that, when combined with the next aspect we'll discuss, clarifies the point that the writers are trying to get across. Destiny has its own flow or path, which won't be dictated by anything outside of itself. We can see that Kratos is on the path of destiny from the exposition, as after he plans on heading back to his home, he's immediately attacked by Freya, then Thor, then visited by Odin. The near instant involvement of three important Norse deities to the events of Ragnarok in which Kratos is foretold to perish signals that even though he tries to step away from everything divine, Kratos will still be involved in the occurrences that unfold in the prophecy. Even more significant attempt to push across the writer's ideas behind the game comes through the implementation of open-world aspects of God of War Ragnarok. Most story-based action and adventure games take very linear approaches when designing maps for exploration. Even well-planned games usually include just a few branching areas for travel and chances to unlock new cosmetics or weapons. The end result is a very streamlined experience that typically has little to no impact on the portrayal of the main narrative of the story. Santa Monica Studio took the opportunity with Ragnarok to expand on the impact that an environment can have on the theme of a game. At first glance, this is very difficult to notice without giving this simple inclusion in nearly every similar game a second thought. After all, common details in games do not typically bear any significance on the ideas behind the game itself and will fly under the radar in most cases. However, adding nuance to simple aspects of a story familiar to a reader, or in this case player, turns out to be a clever and artistic choice on the part of the game's writers. Kratos is known to be on the path to his destiny, and playing the role of Kratos directly challenges the theme of fate implied by the story. God of War includes massive environments in nearly each realm there is to explore, and countless tasks that can be done on the side. These settings provide for a perfect setup to view the opposing side of free will by doing whatever the player sees fit in each realm. Interestingly, this adds a fresh aspect to the theme, as Kratos will ultimately have to return to the main questline to continue building his power and relationship with Atreus, despite the ability to navigate the included open-world sections freely. By adding these sections to the game, the developers actually included a more deep symbolic connotation to the predetermination versus free will argument. Instead of simply being a chance to collect treasures and trinkets, the control given to Kratos in these areas is deemed irrelevant by the continuous flow of the story, justifying the perspective favoring predetermination. Connecting and appealing to the reader, or in this case, player, is a main objective of any good writer trying to get their point across. Things that happen to the characters in a game need to have a link to the player in order to be felt and understood. So now our discussion shifts from in-game theme to how developers and writers of God of War Ragnarok actually bind the game and its lessons to the players. This is done by cleverly allowing flexibility in decision-making, making the God of War's actions more significant to the player, since in the end, you're the one that made the decisions. By tying the results of the story to the player's decision-making, the ending feels unavoidable directly to the player, instead of just the protagonist. Primarily, the writers of God of War Ragnarok use pathos and logos to appeal to players through character interactions. A great example of pathos in Ragnarok comes in the development of Kratos and Atreus' relationship throughout the game. In particular, the part that prophecy plays in said bond is very important and makes the idea more clear and connected to the audience. Originally, Atreus learns about the forebodings of the giants from Angrboda and the murals in her house. Since the writers give the two more than an hour of gameplay to bond, at least for me, Atreus buys into the prophecy and what it entails as he trusts Angrboda. This sets Atreus as an antagonist of sorts to Kratos' beliefs, allowing for an intriguing dynamic throughout the rest of the game. Kratos attempts to reassure Atreus that he'll be okay through the game, but this does not change Atreus' mind. Interactions between the two actually show that Kratos does acknowledge that his viewpoint of indifference could be misled, since he constantly lets us know that he wants his son to be safe in case he did actually die in Ragnarok. So, we see that Atreus shifts his father's view on prophecy from denial to indifference through simply being worried about him. The idea of losing someone close is very human and conveys the feelings and intuitions of a character well. In this case, with Kratos' slightly changing viewpoint of his typically firm beliefs, signifying to the player that a predestined outcome should at least be acknowledged, if not fully accepted. A fantastic example of the use of logos as an appeal to the player's logic is presented in the fact that nearly everything happens exactly as the prophecy foretold as the game builds up to the climax. Large clashes of forces from both Aesir and Vanir's sides, the wolves chasing the sun and moon, which is even made a key mechanic in the game, and others all hint at the fact that the prophecy is fully in play throughout the story. If you actually think for a little bit while playing God of War Ragnarok, you'll realize that Kratos should technically die. It just makes sense as a continuation of what has already been happening. Again, this also ties into the next game, in which I personally predict Ragnarok will be shown to not have concluded, or at least have some repercussions on the characters, resulting in Kratos' death and an end to the legendary game series. I suggest you play through this fabulous game and let us know what you thought of this interesting take. For all I know, Santa Monica Studio may never have intended any of these things in their award-winning game, but that's really what great literature is all about. It allows for many interpretations of the meaning of a work, something I think is very special and unique to the arts. If you want, we'll make a follow-up video to this one to talk about some more interesting aspects and ideas included in God of War Ragnarok, addressing some of the comments left here. Wait, don't leave yet. If you're a fan of gaming and enjoy other critically renowned games, I suggest you check out our video on Super Mario 64, which received the exact same Metacritic rating as Ragnarok. Thanks for stopping by.